I am greeted with a hostile press, the likes of which no president has ever seen. The closest would be that gentleman right up there. They always said Lincoln. Nobody got treated worse than Lincoln. I believe I am treated worse.
So what you just saw there was Donald Trump doing an interview in front of the Lincoln Memorial earlier tonight on Fox News. And during that interview, Donald Trump had a very provocative claim that no U.S. president has been treated worse than him, specifically pertaining to hostile media, quote unquote. And he says that the only one that's come close is Abraham Lincoln, but that even Abraham Lincoln was treated better than Donald Trump. Of course, as we know, in general, we know how Lincoln's presidency ended, right? But even when you throw in the question of the media, it's always going to be very difficult to make a definitive claim about which presidents were quote-unquote treated good or bad by media. But I can say one thing, that Donald Trump's appraisal of how the media regards him is not going to be an accurate one. Because when Donald Trump speaks of media hostility, what he means for the most part is media that disagrees with him. And those are two fundamentally different things. Hostile media is hostile regardless of your factual or moral positions. Media that opposes you from a biased perspective. Now, there are some media sources that oppose Donald Trump with hostility, just as every president has faced media sources that oppose them with hostility. Sources that are ideologically opposed to a given president. But there are other sources that provide what you might call negative coverage, but not hostile coverage. And by that I mean the president gets unfavorable coverage when they do unfavorable things. The president makes a mistake. The president presides over a poor economy and can reasonably be blamed for it. The president does something that creates a national or international scandal. That regardless of your political leanings, that is a misstep and the president should get negative coverage about it. And I think what Donald Trump seems to believe is that because he is a terrible president and has done terrible things, that when he makes mistakes and the media criticizes him for it, his mistakes, his missteps, the awful, often hateful things he said to journalists and to the American people, that means those sources are being unfair to him, are being hostile to him. I don't think that's accurate. If anything, the reason Donald Trump is president today, one of the key reasons, is that the media was far too lenient with Donald Trump in 2015, 2016. Back then, media sort of just covered Donald Trump passively. I'm not necessarily suggesting they were in the pocket of Donald Trump. I don't think many media sources were 100% behind Donald Trump. But I do think that they gave him tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars of free advertising because Trump was such a circus. His rallies, his speeches, his far-right views in some manners were a circus. And the media just showed it because it was ratings gold. And I'm guilty of this as a lot of people. You watch Donald Trump because you were like, man, I never know what this guy is going to say. And the media just ran his press conferences, ran his rallies, but they did so without factual intervention. They did so without fact checking. They did so without questioning the often hateful, bigoted, xenophobic things that the president or the then presidential candidate was saying. And he was able to build momentum during that crucial period, not because he was opposing media hostility, but because the media didn't do their job in holding Donald Trump to account. That's what happened to Donald Trump. If anything, again, Donald Trump didn't get enough critical media at that crucial juncture. And it's a result of the fact that Donald Trump became president, lying a bunch to the American people, that sources started to adjust. And I'm not one to defend the neoliberal media. I'm really not. But I do think it's reasonable that sources act with criticism to a president when that president lies to the media, lies to other governments, lies to other politicians, and lies to the citizenry. And it's not hostile coverage to note that. If you want to look at a candidate that gets hostile coverage, it was Bernie Sanders. Left-wing candidates, I'm not talking about neoliberal Democrats, I'm not talking about Biden, I'm not talking about Pelosi, I'm talking about people like Bernie Sanders, legitimate left-wing candidates. They get hostile media coverage, coverage that openly lies about their positions, coverage that ultimately is designed at a fundamental basis to oppose their vision, coverage that ignores them whenever possible and that only covers them when they can be attacked through that coverage. Donald Trump never got one iota the hostility that Bernie Sanders did in the 2015-2016 campaign or ever since. Donald Trump gets negative coverage, rightfully deserved. Bernie Sanders gets hostile coverage because no matter what he does, the media, at least the vast majority of the mainstream media, is opposed to him. Donald Trump has a lot of fans at Fox News. There's no mainstream news network that was ever favorable to Bernie Sanders on a mass scale. And even during this interview, the subtext to this clip is that they're taking a question from a Trump supporter who's saying, Mr. Trump, I pray for you and I support you, but sometimes the way you talk to the media and to others makes you sound like kind of a bully. And I think that you're losing people when you talk like that. It was a very reasonable, approach from a Trump supporter saying, sir, I like you, but you're not really catching flies with your vinegar. You need some honey in there. You need to talk to the American people in a nice way. Maybe you'll convert some of the people that you appear to be losing. And he said nothing about that. He went right from that into the hostile media coverage. It was an opportunity from a Trump supporter for Trump to say, look, maybe there is a role for me to change my tone. Because the way Trump talks to the media and the way Trump talks sometimes to the American people, the ones that disagree with him at least, is hostile. So if Trump wants to de-escalate the media, if he really does feel the media is hostile to him, well then he should lead by example and he should be nicer to them. Donald Trump has no one to blame for media hostility insofar as it probably doesn't even exist but himself. And Donald Trump should be grateful that the media didn't actually cover him professionally, or otherwise he never would have become president in the first place.